Greetings, everyone. I'm going to be presenting my unit plan as a screencast. I do apologize that I couldn't be at the last class session, but here we go. This is my third grade unit plan. I did mine on a procedural text, a recipe, which is a type of procedural text, homophones and homographs. Here we have all our standards. Students are writing narratives to develop real or imagined experiences. They used temporal words to signal events of order, like first, second, third. They describe the relationship between a series of historical events or steps and technical procedures in a text, using language that pertains to time. Here they determine or clarify the meaning of unknown and multiple meaning words, aka homophones, homographs. They use sentence-level context as clue to the meaning of a word or phrase, report on a topic, tell a story, speak in complete sentences when appropriate to task and situation. Transfer knowledge students will be able to independently use their learning to understand sequence of events and temporal words that signal the events the order of events. Understandings, they'll understand that words that signal order are words such as first, before, then, next, after, finally. They will understand that procedural text has several components, including steps, ingredients, and tools. Essential questions. How can we signal the order in which events are happening? How are homophones and homographs the same? How do we use procedural text to make rice? What activities can we do to help us order the steps in a recipe? So these are all the essential questions. I have lots of them here. The acquisition, we have knowledge and skills. Knowledge, they will know that temporal words are used to sequence the order of events. They'll know the differences between homographs and homophones. Know that a recipe is a type of procedural text. These are the skills they'll be gaining. Skilled at sequencing the order of events. Skilled at using sentence structures. Skilled at following multiple oral directions. Skilled at comparing and contrasting. Skilled at writing, describing text steps of technical procedures, skilled at orally presenting information, and skilled at organizing their thoughts and information in a graphic organizer. Here are the rubrics, which I'll be showing you in a minute. And here are the lessons. Our first lesson is a reading lesson, reading, making rice. Then we have homographs, homophones, comparing and contrasting. Let's follow a recipe is where they, follow along. It's also reading. Write your own recipe, writing a recipe. It's my writing portion. Oral presentation, special food from your culture, is the speaking component. So here's lesson plan 1. We read a story called Making Rice to sequence the order of events of the recipe for making rice. The students should use temporal words such as first, next, then, finally, and so on to signal the order in which events occur. Let's go down to language function. Language function is to order, organize, sequence of events, and use temporal vocabulary words to indicate the order in which events occur. Students will be able to order, organize the sequence of events of a recipe by using the Making Rice booklet and using a sequencing events worksheet. Students will be able to indicate the order in which events occur by using temporal words such as first, before, then, next, after, and finally. And here are the vocabulary. So we begin with, we follow the recipe, we make an anchor chart, talk about temporal words, we preview the book and the photographs, we talk about whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Read a story, highlight important events. We discuss the events that happened. We explain that recipes are written in a specific order. Tell students the words to signal order. I will model how to fill in the graphic organizer, and students will work in a group to fill in the graphic organizer. Graphic organizer is sequencing order of events, and that's how I will be assessing them. I will monitor how well they sequence events in their graphic organizer. Here's lesson plan 2, homographs, homophones. The central focus is to use knowledge of homophones and homographs to decide which category pairs of words to go in. They will use a Venn diagram to categorize word pairs and compare and contrast. They'll be able to classify words as homographs and homophones They'll be able to compare and contrast content-based information. And of course I failed to mention this is all a small group of 4 ELs. The language function is to compare and contrast homophones and homographs to demonstrate understanding that even though words may sound the same or share the same meaning, they have many different meanings. To use sentence structures that compare and contrast word pairs to determine if the words are homographs or homophones. We'll begin with a matching game, and I've uploaded that video already of this lesson. They will have to do their best after listening to my instructions about how to play the game. And I will tell them what a homophone is and what a homograph is. Then they'll play the game, we'll hand out the Venn diagram, we'll further discuss what a homograph homophone is. I will give examples by using the words from the word match game. Then we'll use the Venn diagram to compare and contrast and categorize the word pairs. I'll model how to fill in the sentence structure so students can work with their group members to discuss where the word pairs go. The assessment will be formal. I will use the sentence frames to observe whether students understood the lesson. Lesson plan 3. Let's follow a recipe. The central focus for this lesson will be to understand that a recipe is a kind of procedural text in which there are steps to follow to reach an end result. Procedural texts are part of everyday life, and a skill we all must have is the ability to follow procedural text, such as a recipe. Students will be able to recognize that a procedural text has multiple steps to follow. They can order the steps in a procedural text using oral and written directions, and will be able to explain and interpret information in procedural text. The language function is students will be able to follow multi-step oral directions. Students will be able to arrange, describe, sequence events and stories or content-based processes. Students will understand and explain the importance of the sequence of steps in a recipe and cause and effect connections. We'll play a game. They'll be given the recipe. They'll be asked to put the steps in order to ascertain if they know how to sequence. I will guide this, then we'll go over the vocabulary words on an anchor chart. An anchor chart will be a reference tool for students. After we do the game, we'll look at the recipe again. We will follow the recipe and fill out a KWL and what we know about procedural texts. We'll be looking at making rice recipe again. What kind of information to give from the recipe? These are all questions I'll ask them. We'll learn more about recipes. We'll follow this recipe for making rice and make our own rice. Tomorrow we'll practice on writing our own recipe, which is the next lesson. I'll be asking these essential questions as we read the recipe. What information do you get from a recipe? Is the sequence of steps important in the recipe? How do you know? What are the important parts of a recipe? How can I use what I know about recipes to write my own recipe? We're going to go over each part, discuss their importance, revisiting the above guiding questions. I'll allow students to ask and answer questions as well. Ask questions as well. Then we'll follow the directions we already know so well and make yourselves a delicious treat, some rice. The assessment will be formal. The assessment will be that they put the recipe steps in order on their own. And these are the recipe steps, and they should be in order. Lesson plan 4, writing a recipe. Students will write a recipe with teacher guidance. This proves students' understanding of sequencing and procedural texts and the components of a recipe. They'll be able to write a recipe using a template or writing frame for writing directions and a word bank of important words. They'll be able to describe steps of technical procedures in a text using language that pertains to time and sequence. They'll know how to follow a recipe with simple directions, and they know the components of a recipe. Students can follow a recipe and use realia associated with recipes such as a measuring cup. Students struggle with writing their own recipe. So this is their prior knowledge. The language functions. I can write a complete sentence using grade-appropriate grammar and conventions. I can sequence events in a simple story. I can write a list of ingredients in a recipe. I can write a series of steps or directions in sequence. I can arrange events in order using temporal words. I can write a recipe for my favorite food. Here's the word bank of temporal words. They'll start off by exploring additional recipes. I'll be providing student-friendly cookbooks or copies of student-friendly recipes. They share their favorite recipe that they found in the group. Then they're going to practice writing their own recipe, but first we will begin with them helping me write the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'll guide students through the process by asking the following questions. What ingredients do I need? What do I do first? What word could I use to show that this is the first step? What would I do next? How can I show that this is the next step in my writing? What would I do after that? What is my last step? What words or words can I use to show it is the last step? We read the steps when the recipe is complete. I will then ask students if the recipe is complete. We'll discuss that we're going to check that the recipe is written clearly by following the directions and making a sandwich. So I pass out the ingredients, things we need. We follow it step by step, make a sandwich. They can eat their sandwich after we are done. We ask questions. Does anything need to be added to make the directions easier to follow? I'll ask guiding questions as they are writing their recipe. Is a sequence of steps important? How do you know? What would happen if you forgot a step or left out an ingredient? What would happen if you did not follow directions in order? Questions like that. They'll write the recipe for their favorite food. We'll go over the recipe rubric before students write to make sure they understand the expectations. I'll provide feedback. It'll be oral, provided through the lessons. Closure. They will share their recipes with the group. Students can illustrate their recipe and recipes can be bound together to create a cookbook. The assessment will be summative. They will write a set of directions and ingredients in the form of a recipe for making a favorite food. They will be assessed using the recipe rubric. During the lesson, the teacher will formally assess student understanding through the students' responses to oral questions. Lesson 5. Recipe rubric might be popping up soon. Let's go to the top of lesson 5. Oh, this was supposed to say 5th lesson. Is this the right lesson? Okay. Alrighty, so this is lesson 5, special food from your culture. Students will orally and visually present their findings, recipe on a special food from their culture to the group. They'll be able to present their findings orally and visually using a presentation tool like PowerPoint. They'll be able to research the topic using the internet and relevant books. They'll be able to use a graphic organizer to organize their thoughts and findings, and will be able to speak clearly and in complete sentences about their topic. The language functions are: I can organize my thoughts using a graphic organizer. I can gather information about a special food from my country. Using the internet and books, I can create a visual presentation on a special food from my culture using the internet and PowerPoint. I can present information orally to my group by using a PowerPoint presentation tool. Here are our vocabulary words. We'll go over them as we move along the lesson, pausing to ask and answer questions to clarify. We'll begin off with a PowerPoint presentation on my country and the special foods from it. I'll present orally and visually to model for students what is expected of them. Then we will move on to a KWL chart on what they know about their own country and the foods that come from it. KWL will have a section to fill out for each student, and there are 4. The KWL will assess students' prior knowledge or experiences with their own country. So that was a hook activity. And we move on to the rubric for the oral presentation. I'll go over with students what is expected of them for this assignment. We'll go over the characteristics of a good oral presenter. Speak clearly, stand up straight, eye contact, volume is loud enough to be heard by all audience members. Is prepared with all needed materials. Body language shows that they relax and know their topic well. After we have done this, students will receive a graphic organizer to organize all their findings. They will use it as a guide with sentence starters and ideas for what to research. They will use their